Senator Maya Richardson's day had begun 18 hours ago, and she could feel every minute of it in her tired bones. The clock on her phone showed 9:45 p.m. as she walked through Ronald Reagan National Airport, pulling her small carry-on suitcase behind her. Unlike most days when she wore her signature power suits, today she had changed into comfortable black yoga pants, a loose Howard University sweatshirt, and simple running shoes after the late evening Senate session. The fluorescent lights of the airport terminal cast harsh shadows as Maya made her way to gate C-23. Her natural hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she had removed her contact lenses in favor of her thick-rimmed reading glasses. A few people hurried past her, caught up in their own journeys, none recognizing the woman who had just hours ago been leading a heated debate on police reform on the Senate floor. The gate area was relatively quiet when Maya arrived. She found a seat near the charging station and pulled out her tablet, quickly typing responses to urgent constituent emails. Her legislative aide, Marcus Thompson, sat a few rows behind her, engaged in a quiet phone conversation about tomorrow's schedule in Los Angeles. Now boarding first-class passengers for Flight AA 2490 to Los Angeles, the gate agent announced, her voice echoing through the terminal. Maya gathered her belongings, joining the short line of first-class passengers. She handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, who barely glanced at it before waving her through. As she walked down the jet bridge, she felt the familiar weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Even this trip home wasn't purely personal. She had 3 community meetings scheduled for tomorrow, including one with families affected by police misconduct. The first-class cabin welcomed her with its soft lighting and wide leather seats. Maya stored her carry-on in the overhead compartment, keeping only her tablet and a small bag containing her reading materials. As she settled into seat 2A, she couldn't help but smile at the irony. 20 years ago, she had been a flight attendant on this very route, working her way through law school. A flight attendant approached with a pre-flight drink menu. "Good evening, would you like something to drink before takeoff?" "Just water, please," Maya replied, already pulling up the draft of her police reform bill on her tablet. The flight attendant returned quickly with her water, placing it on the side table without ceremony. More passengers filed past her seat, the usual parade of business travelers and vacationers heading to the West Coast. Maya noticed a few curious glances from those who might have found it unusual to see a black woman in first class dressed so casually, but she was too tired to care. She had earned her seat here, just as she had earned her seat in the Senate. The cabin slowly filled with the quiet murmur of conversations and the rustle of passengers storing their bags. Maya scrolled through her messages, pausing to read an important update from her chief of staff about tomorrow's schedule. The community meeting in Crenshaw had been moved to an earlier time slot, which meant she would need to head there directly from the airport. As the final passengers boarded, Maya felt a slight chill from the air conditioning. She pressed the call button, and when the flight attendant appeared, she asked politely for a blanket. The simple request would soon trigger a chain of events that would make national headlines, though Maya had no way of knowing that as she wrapped the soft blue blanket around her shoulders. Marcus finished his phone call and walked past her seat, giving her a quick nod before taking his own seat a few rows back. They had worked together for 6 years now, and he knew her preference for privacy during flights. Maya adjusted her reading glasses and opened a folder containing letters from constituents, each one describing their experiences with law enforcement. These stories had been the driving force behind her police reform bill, and she intended to review them one more time before tomorrow's meetings. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their imminent departure. Maya took a sip of her water and settled deeper into her seat, unaware that in just a few minutes, she would become the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. Officer James Barrett stood near the back of the plane, his hand resting casually on his belt as he watched a flight attendant deal with a minor dispute in economy class. Someone had reclined their seat too far back, and the passenger behind them was making a fuss. It was the kind of routine call that made up most of his airport police work. At 45 years old, with 18 years on the force, Barrett considered himself an expert at reading people and situations. The economy class issue resolved itself quickly, but Barrett didn't leave the plane right away. Something had caught his attention in first class, a woman in casual clothes who seemed, in his mind, out of place. He watched as she gestured to a flight attendant, her movement confident and direct. Barrett had seen thousands of first-class passengers in his career, and they usually fit a certain image. This woman, with her sweatshirt and yoga pants, didn't match his mental picture. Barrett began walking toward the front of the plane, his boots making soft sounds against the carpet. He noticed how other passengers seemed to shrink away slightly as he passed, a reaction he had grown used to over his years wearing the uniform. The airplane's bright lighting reflected off his badge as he approached the first-class cabin. The woman was now wrapped in an airline blanket, focused intently on a tablet in her lap. Barrett stood beside her seat, deliberately positioning himself to cast a shadow over her screen. When she didn't immediately look up, he cleared his throat loudly. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification," Barrett said, his voice carrying the automatic authority that came from years of giving orders. He noticed several passengers turning to watch the interaction, but he kept his eyes fixed on the woman. Maya looked up from her tablet, her expression calm but slightly confused. "I'm sorry, officer, is there a problem? I already showed my ID during boarding." Barrett's jaw tightened slightly. In his experience, people who questioned his requests were usually hiding something. "That's not what I asked, ma'am. I need to see your ID now." A flight attendant, Sarah Chen, according to her name tag, approached cautiously. "Officer Barrett, is everything okay? This passenger is cleared for." "Please step back," Barrett interrupted, not taking his eyes off Maya. "This is a security matter." Maya sat up straighter in her seat, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but I'd like to know why you're singling me out for additional identification checks." Barrett felt a familiar surge of frustration. Why couldn't people just comply with simple requests? He noticed her Howard University sweatshirt and made assumptions about what kind of attitude he was dealing with. "Ma'am, if you continue to be uncooperative, I'll have to ask you to leave the aircraft." By now, the entire first-class cabin had fallen silent. A businessman across the aisle had taken out his phone and was holding it at an angle that suggested he was recording. Barrett ignored him, focusing on what he saw as defiance in Maya's expression. "I'm not being uncooperative," Maya replied, her voice steady and clear. "I'm asking for clarification about why I'm being subjected to additional screening after already clearing security and boarding checks." Barrett's hand moved to rest more obviously on his belt, near his handcuffs. "Step out of your seat, ma'am. Now." Maya remained perfectly still, her hands visible on the armrests. "Officer, I believe you're making a mistake. I'd like to speak with your supervisor." The atmosphere in the cabin grew tenser. More phones had appeared, their cameras pointed toward the confrontation. Sarah Chen had stepped back to make a quiet call on the plane's internal phone, her worried expression suggesting she was contacting someone in authority. Barrett felt the situation slipping away from him, but he couldn't back down now. He dealt with difficult passengers before, and experience told him that showing weakness only encouraged defiance. He reached for his handcuffs, the metal making a distinct clicking sound as he removed them from his belt. "Last warning," he said, his voice harder now. "Either you show me some ID, or you're leaving this plane in custody." What Officer Barrett didn't realize was that his next actions would not only end up on dozens of cell phone videos, but would also become a turning point in his career and in the larger national conversation about law enforcement and racial bias. The tension in the first-class cabin had become thick enough to cut with a knife. Maya maintained her composure, though her heart was racing beneath her calm exterior. She had faced discrimination before, but never quite so blatantly, and never with handcuffs being brandished in her face. "Sir," Maya said, keeping her voice steady and professional, "I want to be very clear about what's happening here. You've approached me, and only me, in this cabin, demanding identification after I've already gone through proper boarding procedures. I'm asking you to explain why." More phones appeared around the cabin, their camera lenses glinting in the overhead lights. A young woman in seat 4C whispered to her seatmate, "This is going straight to Twitter." The soft sounds of recording buttons being pressed created an almost musical undertone to the tense scene. Officer Barrett's face had taken on a reddish tinge. He wasn't used to having his authority questioned so calmly and articulately. In his experience, people either quickly complied or became aggressive. This measured resistance was something new, and it unsettled him. "Ma'am, your attitude is making you suspicious," Barrett declared, his voice rising slightly. This is a security matter, and I don't have to explain myself to you. Sarah Chen, the flight attendant, had returned from making her call. She hovered nearby, clearly distressed by the situation. Officer Barrett, I've contacted the flight supervisor, and there? Stay out of this, Barrett snapped, cutting her off again. The sharp tone of his voice made several passengers flinch. Maya folded her hands in her lap, a gesture that was both non-threatening and dignified. Officer Barrett, that's your name, correct? I want to make sure I have it right for the formal complaint I'll be filing. You've now escalated this situation without cause, and you're creating a delay in this flight's departure. I'm happy to show you my ID again, but I want it noted that I'm doing so under protest, and I want your badge number. A businessman in an expensive suit spoke up from across the aisle. I've been recording this whole interaction, officer. The lady hasn't done anything wrong. Several other passengers nodded in agreement. Barrett's hand tightened on his handcuffs, the passengers recording him, the woman's calm defiance, the growing murmur of disapproval from other passengers. It all combined to make him more determined to assert his authority. Ma'am, stand up slowly and place your hands where I can see them, Barrett ordered, his voice now carrying a dangerous edge. Maya didn't move. Instead, she spoke clearly and loudly enough for all the recording phones to pick up her words. I am sitting here peacefully. I have not raised my voice. I have not made any threatening movements. I am simply asking for the reason why I'm being singled out for additional screening after having already gone through proper security and boarding procedures. Your response has been to threaten me with arrest. By now, passengers in economy class were craning their necks to see what was happening. The flight attendants had gathered in a small group near the galley, speaking urgently into their phones. The situation had clearly spiraled beyond a simple ID check. Officer, a gray-haired woman in seat 1B spoke up, her voice sharp with disapproval. I've been watching this whole thing. You haven't asked anyone else for their ID. Just the only black person in first class. Care to explain that? Barrett's face flushed darker. Ma'am, do not interfere with a police officer in the execution of his duties. Oh, we're not interfering, another passenger called out. We're just documenting. The sound of more phones being unlocked and camera apps being opened emphasized his point. Maya remained still, her years of experience in high-pressure political situations serving her well. She knew that every word and movement was being recorded, and she was determined to handle this situation in a way that might create meaningful change. Officer Barrett, she said, her voice carrying the same authority she used in Senate hearings, I can see your supervisor approaching down the jet bridge. Would you like to explain your actions to them, or shall I? Officer Barrett saw his supervisor approaching through the jet bridge window, but something in him refused to back down now. He had gone too far to retreat, and his pride wouldn't let him admit he might have made a mistake. Instead, he reached for Maya's arm. You're coming with me now, he said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. We can sort this out off the plane. The moment his hand touched Maya's arm, multiple voices rose in protest. The businessman with the phone stood up, his expensive suit wrinkling as he moved. Hey, you can't do that. Maya didn't pull away, but she also didn't move to stand. Her voice remained steady as she spoke. Officer Barrett, you are now putting your hands on me without cause. I want everyone recording this to note that I have not resisted, I have not raised my voice, and I have not made any threatening movements. Sarah Chen, the flight attendant, had finally had enough. She stepped forward, her professional demeanor barely hiding her distress. Officer, the captain has requested that you wait for your supervisor before taking any further action. Barrett's grip on Maya's arm tightened. This is a police matter. The captain doesn't have authority here. Actually, came a new voice from the front of the cabin. I have complete authority over what happens on my aircraft. Captain David Rodriguez had emerged from the cockpit, his 4 stripes gleaming on his shoulders. His face was stern as he surveyed the scene. Barrett found himself in an increasingly difficult position. The captain's arrival had changed the power dynamics, but his hand was still on Maya's arm, and he could feel dozens of phone cameras recording his every move. This passenger is being uncooperative with a police officer, Barrett insisted, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. I've been watching on the cockpit camera. Captain Rodriguez replied calmly. The only thing I've seen is a passenger sitting quietly while being harassed. Remove your hand from her arm, Officer Barrett. That's not a request. At that moment, Barrett's supervisor, Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, entered the cabin. She took in the scene quickly, the recording phones, the angry passengers, her officer with his hand on a calm woman's arm, and the captain standing with authority at the front of the cabin. Barrett. Lieutenant Martinez's voice cracked like a whip. Stand down immediately. Barrett's hand dropped from Maya's arm, but the damage was done. Red marks were visible where his fingers had gripped her, and multiple passengers had captured it all on video. Ma'am, Lieutenant Martinez addressed Maya, her tone completely different from Barrett's. I sincerely apologize for this incident. Are you all right? Maya rubbed her arm where Barrett had grabbed her. I would like Officer Barrett's badge number and a copy of the incident report, she said firmly. I also want it noted that at no point was I given a legitimate reason for being singled out for additional screening. Lieutenant Martinez turned to Barrett, her expression hard. Officer Barrett, step outside. Now, she then addressed the cabin at large. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd apologize for this disruption. Those of you who have recorded this incident, please be aware that our department will need copies of your videos for our internal investigation. Oh, don't worry, the businessman with the phone said grimly. These videos are already being uploaded. My daughter works at CNN, and she's getting them right now. Maya finally stood, her full height and bearing suddenly more noticeable. Lieutenant Martinez, I appreciate your intervention, but this incident represents exactly the kind of law enforcement overreach that needs to be addressed. As a United States Senator and the author of the current police reform bill before Congress, I can assure you this will be discussed at the highest levels. The silence that followed her words was absolute. Officer Barrett, who had been moving toward the exit, froze in his tracks. Lieutenant Martinez's eyes widened in recognition. The passengers who had been recording everything suddenly realized they had captured something much bigger than a routine case of police harassment. In that moment of stunned silence, Marcus Thompson, Maya's legislative aide, finally returned from the bathroom. Taking in the scene, he immediately pulled out his phone and began dialing numbers. The real storm was about to begin. The revelation that Maya was a United States Senator hit the cabin like a thunderbolt. Officer Barrett's face had turned from red to ashen gray in seconds, while Lieutenant Martinez was already reaching for her phone with trembling fingers. The quiet that followed Maya's announcement lasted only moments before chaos erupted. Marcus Thompson, Maya's legislative aide, moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency. His phone was already pressed to his ear as he spoke rapidly. Yes, Senator Richardson has just been physically accosted by airport police on flight AA 2490. We need immediate intervention from the airport authority director, and get me the airline's PR department. Passengers who had been recording the incident were now frantically sharing their videos. The businessman who had mentioned CNN was typing rapidly on his phone, his voice carrying clearly through the cabin. Emily, this is huge. Senator Richardson, yes, that Senator Richardson, the one pushing the police reform bill, was just racially profiled and assaulted by airport police. I'm sending you the video now. Lieutenant Martinez stepped forward, her face a mask of professional concern hiding pure panic. Senator Richardson, I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am for this incident. I assure you that Officer Barrett's actions do not reflect our department's values or training. Maya remained standing, her presence now somehow larger than before, though she hadn't changed at all. She spoke clearly, knowing that cameras were still recording. Lieutenant, your department's values and training are precisely what we need to discuss. This incident is a perfect example of why my police reform bill is necessary. The flight attendant, Sarah Chen, had tears in her eyes as she approached. Senator, the airline's regional director is on his way to the gate. He's asking if you'd like to speak with him privately in the lounge. Officer Barrett stood frozen near the exit, his career flashing before his eyes. The same authority he had wielded so confidently minutes ago now felt like a lead weight around his neck. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. More officials began arriving at the gate. The airport authority director, Richard Palmer, rushed onto the plane, slightly out of breath. He was followed by the airline's regional director, James Wilson, both men looking thoroughly alarmed. Senator Richardson, Palmer began, I just received word of this incident. We're prepared to take whatever steps you deem necessary to address this situation. Maya held up her hand, silencing the growing chorus of apologies and explanations. What happened here tonight is not about me, she said, her voice carrying the same power it did on the Senate floor. This is about every black person who doesn't have the protection of a Senate title. This is about every minority who has been profiled, harassed, or made to feel less than human by law enforcement. Marcus was still working his phones, now with 2 devices going at once. Senator, your office has been notified. The majority leader is asking for a briefing, and we're getting media requests already. The videos are going viral. A young woman in row 3 raised her hand excitedly. Senator, your name is trending on Twitter. The videos have over 50,000 shares already. The airline's regional director stepped forward anxiously. Senator Richardson, we can have you rebooked on a private flight immediately if you prefer. Maya shook her head, her determination clear. No, I will be taking this flight as planned. But I expect to see immediate changes in how law enforcement operates in this airport. She turned to Lieutenant Martinez. I want a full investigation, and I want the results sent to my office. This incident will be referenced in our committee hearings on police reform next week. Officer Barrett finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Senator, I didn't know. Maya fixed him with a steady gaze. That's precisely the problem, Officer Barrett. You shouldn't need to know that someone is a senator to treat them with basic human dignity and respect. The truth of her words hung in the air, captured by dozens of phones and about to be shared with millions of people across the country. Within 30 minutes of the incident, the videos had spread across every major social media platform. The airline's first-class lounge had been transformed into an impromptu crisis management center with airline executives, airport officials, and police administrators huddled in different corners, all speaking urgently into their phones. Maya sat calmly in a comfortable leather chair, reviewing messages on her tablet while Marcus coordinated with their team in Washington. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the incident, with calls coming in from fellow senators, news organizations, and civil rights leaders. Senator, Marcus said, covering his phone's microphone, CNN wants to do a live interview in 10 minutes. MSNBC is offering to send a crew to meet you in Los Angeles, and the New York Times is running it as their lead story for tomorrow's morning edition. The airline's regional director, James Wilson, hovered nearby, his forehead shiny with sweat. Senator Richardson, we've arranged for private security to escort you to Los Angeles. Officers from a different department, of course. And we'd like to offer you lifetime premier status with our airline as a small gesture of... Mr. Wilson, Maya interrupted gently. What I want is not special treatment for myself. What I want is for your airline to implement comprehensive anti-bias training for all your staff and to review your protocols for involving law enforcement in passenger situations. In another corner of the lounge, Lieutenant Martinez was dealing with her own crisis. She had already placed Officer Barrett on immediate administrative leave, but the department's phone lines were flooded with calls from reporters and angry citizens. The video had reached over 1 million views across different platforms, and the hashtag #SenatorOnaplane was trending nationally. Officer Barrett sat alone in a small office near the police station, his uniform jacket now off, his face in his hands. Internal affairs investigators had already taken his preliminary statement, and his police union representative was on the way. His 18-year career flashed before his eyes as he watched the videos of himself playing on every news channel on the office TV. Back in the lounge, Maya's phone lit up with a text from the Senate Majority Leader. This is exactly why we need your bill. Emergency session called for Monday. You'll have the floor first. Senator, Marcus said, approaching with a fresh cup of tea, your community meeting's in Los Angeles tomorrow. Do you want to reschedule? Maya shook her head firmly. Absolutely not. This incident makes those meetings more important than ever. We're going to use this moment to push for real change. Outside the lounge, a crowd of reporters had gathered, held back by airport security. Their cameras flashed through the glass walls, and their shouted questions could be faintly heard. The airport's PR team was frantically preparing a press statement, consulting with lawyers on every word. Sarah Chen, the flight attendant who had tried to intervene, had been invited to the lounge to give her statement. She sat with airline investigators, describing everything she had witnessed. I knew something was wrong the moment Officer Barrett approached her, she explained, wiping tears from her eyes. I should have done more to stop it. Maya overheard this and walked over to Sarah. You did try to help, and I noticed that. This isn't about individuals making better choices. It's about changing the system that enables these situations. A young social media manager for the airline approached timidly with her phone. Senator, your statement on the plane has gone viral. Over 2 million views in just the last hour. People are calling it a watershed moment for the police reform movement. The airline's CEO had just landed after an emergency flight from Chicago. He burst into the lounge, straightening his tie, ready to do damage control. But before he could speak, Maya stood up. Gentlemen, she addressed the room of flustered executives and officials. In about an hour, I'm going to board another flight to Los Angeles. When I do, I want every person watching to understand that what happened tonight isn't just about me. It's about making sure this never happens to anyone else, regardless of their title or position. Now, let's talk about exactly how you're all going to help make that happen. 3 days after the incident, the video had been viewed over 50 million times. Every major news network had run the story, and Senator Richardson's face appeared on countless screens across America. The incident had become a catalyst for a national conversation about police reform and racial profiling. In a packed Senate hearing room, Maya sat at the center of the Judiciary Committee panel. She had transformed her personal experience into powerful testimony, with the viral videos playing on large screens behind her. The room fell silent as the footage showed Officer Barrett grabbing her arm. What you see in these videos, Maya addressed her colleagues, her voice steady and clear, is not just one incident. It's a representation of what happens every day to countless Americans who don't have the protection of a Senate title. In another part of Washington, Officer Barrett sat through his first day of administrative hearings. The police union representatives flanked him as internal affairs investigators reviewed the evidence. His hands trembled slightly as he watched himself on screen, seeing his actions through new eyes. Officer Barrett, the lead investigator, asked, "Can you explain what specific probable cause you had for demanding Senator Richardson's identification?" Barrett's voice was barely audible. I had none, sir. I made assumptions based on my biases." The airline industry was experiencing its own upheaval. After the incident went viral, passengers began sharing their own stories of discrimination on flights using the hashtag #FlyingWildLack. The airline's CEO announced a comprehensive review of their security protocols and launched mandatory anti-bias training for all employees. Sarah Chen, the flight attendant who had tried to intervene, found herself being interviewed by major news outlets. "It was a wake-up call for all of us," she told the reporters. "We need to be braver about speaking up when we see something wrong." At a community center in Los Angeles, Maya met with families who had experienced similar incidents of police profiling. The room was packed, with people standing along the walls and sitting on the floor. Many cried as they shared their stories, finally feeling heard. "Your courage in that moment gave us all courage," a young mother told Maya, holding her small child close. "When I saw you stay calm and stand your ground, it showed my daughter what strength looks like." The police department underwent significant changes. Lieutenant Martinez, determined to make real reforms, implemented new training programs and revised their protocols for passenger interactions. She invited civil rights leaders and community representatives to help reshape their approach to law enforcement. Social media continued to amplify the impact. Celebrities and influencers shared the video, adding their own experiences of racial profiling. The hashtag Senator on a Plane evolved into a broader movement, with people using it to document and challenge discriminatory behavior across the country. Marcus Thompson, Maya's aide, managed the growing media requests while helping prepare amendments to strengthen the police reform bill. "Senator," he said, reviewing the latest polling data, "public support for the bill has increased by 30% since the incident. People are finally understanding why these changes are necessary." In police academies across the country, instructors began using the video as a training tool. They analyzed every moment of the interaction, teaching new officers about the dangers of unchecked bias and the importance of de-escalation. The airline industry's largest trade association announced new guidelines for member airlines, specifically addressing when and how law enforcement should be involved in passenger situations. They created a passenger bill of rights with specific protections against discriminatory treatment. Back in her Senate office, Maya reviewed the final draft of her strengthened police reform bill. The incident had given her even more motivation to push for meaningful change. Her phone buzzed with a message. Another video had gone viral, this time showing a police officer in Michigan stopping himself mid-confrontation, saying, "I don't want to be the next Officer Barrett." Change happens one moment at a time, Maya told her staff during their morning meeting. What happened on that plane was terrible, but if it helps prevent similar incidents in the future, then something good will have come from it. 3 months after the incident, Senator Maya Richardson stood at a podium in the Capitol, surrounded by colleagues from both parties. The Police Reform and Accountability Act had just passed with bipartisan support, marking a historic moment in American law enforcement history. Today, Maya addressed the gathered crowd. "We've taken a significant step toward ensuring equal treatment under the law for all Americans. What happened to me on that plane happens to countless citizens every day. The difference is, now we're doing something about it." In a surprising turn of events, former Officer James Barrett sat in the audience. After his suspension and nearly losing his job, he had made an unexpected choice. Instead of fighting the disciplinary actions, he had volunteered to become part of the solution. Now he traveled to police departments across the country, sharing his story as a cautionary tale and teaching officers about unconscious bias. "I was wrong," Barrett told a group of police cadets during a training session. "I let my biases control my actions, and in doing so, I betrayed my oath to protect and serve. But mistake can be a teacher if we're willing to learn from it." The airline industry had undergone its own transformation. The incident had sparked a complete overhaul of security protocols across all major carriers. Sarah Chen, the flight attendant who had tried to help Maya, had been promoted to head a new passenger advocacy program. "We trained over 10,000 airline employees in the past 3 months," Sarah explained during a press conference. "Our new motto is dignity in flight. It means every passenger deserves respect, regardless of how they look or what they're wearing." Marcus Thompson, still serving as Maya's legislative aide, had created a database tracking similar incidents nationwide. The numbers showed a significant decrease in reported cases of racial profiling at airports since the new protocols were implemented. "It's not just about the numbers," Marcus told a reporter. "It's about changing the culture." When that video went viral, it opened a lot of people's eyes to something that had been happening all along. Lieutenant Martinez, who had handled the crisis that night, had been promoted to captain and now headed the department's newly created Community Relations Division. She worked closely with civil rights organizations to rebuild trust between law enforcement and minority communities. "The incident with Senator Richardson taught us a valuable lesson," Martinez said during the community meeting. "Authority without accountability is dangerous. We're working every day to earn back the public's trust." The businessman who had first recorded the incident had started a nonprofit organization that provided legal support to victims of racial profiling. His daughter at CNN had produced an award-winning documentary about the incident and its impact on American society. Maya's Howard University sweatshirt, which she had worn that night, was now displayed in the National Museum of African American History and Culture, along with a timeline of the incident and its effects on police reform. Sometimes, Maya told a group of students visiting the museum, "Change comes from unexpected moments. What matters is how we use those moments to create lasting improvement." The airport where the incident occurred had become a model for others across the country. They had installed a new training center where security personnel learned about cultural sensitivity and de-escalation techniques. A plaque in the center's main hall quoted Maya's words from that night. "You shouldn't need to know someone is a senator to treat them with basic human dignity and respect." 1 year after the incident, Maya boarded another flight at the same airport. This time, she was greeted with respectful nods from security personnel who had been through the new training program. As she settled into her seat, wearing another comfortable sweatshirt, a young